Hello, hello, hello. Welcome. So excited that everyone has joined us this morning. My name is Ark Telos Saint Amor. It's a very long name, so most folks call me Tay, but it's all affirming. My mandatory pronouns are they, them, there, and I am going to be your session moderator today. And oh my gosh, do we have an awesome session for you today? I am super excited about it. But before we jump in, we do have some housekeeping items that I do want to share. I just want to remind everyone in general that we are committed to maintaining a safe and brave and accountable space. So, as best as you can, sort of slow down, prime with intention, be mindful to be equitable and kind. And if you have any issues, having any problems, if you need assistance, please feel free to message me in the chat, or you can even private message me as well, and we'll try to work with you. So just please, as best as you can, we're going to really try to maintain our commitment to make this a safe and brave, accountable space. Secondly, I want to walk through the toolbar because it's pretty intense. We got some pretty awesome things here. So it is a vertical toolbar. It should be on the right-hand side of your screen. If you don't see all the little icons, you may actually have a feed open. So there should be an X in the upper right-hand corner. If you press that, you should start to see your vertical toolbar. First one's called Manage. Second one is Chat. Have that chat box open. We're going to be trying the best we can to read the chats. There's a lot of folks here today. So again, we will try our best, but it probably will move pretty fast, but it's an important tool. And then right below that is probably the most important tool for today's session, which is the Q&A box. Now, we encourage y'all to ask questions, but if you put it in the chat, it may be missed. And if you raise your hand, we're not going to actually be able to call upon you. So if you're able to please put your questions into that Q&A box, we'll make sure that we get to your question as best as we can at the end of the session. So that's kind of the vertical toolbar that I'm hoping everyone can see. If you can't see it, you may need to X out of a window so that that pops up. Lastly, I just want to know that if you've got to take a break, if you need to self-care, if you need to debrief, decompress, anything you've got to do, no worries. We really encourage you to take care of yourself and to show up today as you are. If you need our wellness room that is available to you, it should be in the upper left-hand corner. So if you sort of click that, that should take you into that room, and a staff member will be available to you. So those are kind of the housekeeping items. With that, I'm excited to get us going, and it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Survivance and the Healing from Historical Trauma, the Power of Storytelling and Relational Practices. Dr. Mock, the stage is yours. I'm going to move you up and step away. Okay, Dr. Mock, we can see your screen, so that's good. If you want to come on camera and unmute, we should be good to go. That'd be your bottom toolbar there. We can't see or hear you yet. So if you go to that bottom toolbar, you should see a little camera box. If you click that, you'll come on screen. And then right next to that should be a little mic icon. And if you click on that, we should be able to hear you. Oh, we still can't hear or see you yet, Dr. Mock. Oh, I can hear you now.
All right.
I can see you. There you are.
All right. We're going to try to do this, everyone. So I want to acknowledge you, first of all, everyone, from wherever you are. We'll try to smooth out all the bumps here. And I really appreciate Ark Telos Saint Amor. I love saying your name. I'm just meeting him for the first time. And one of the things we talk about is, by the way, this idea about relationships. And so meeting Ark for the first time, and actually his great introduction. By the way, he mentioned the word awesome. And I'll come back to that before the hour is up, about we need to hold on to that concept of what it means to have awesome experiences, including the telling of stories. As Ark just described, we shall not do this work alone, all the more related to issues around survivance and healing after trauma. This idea about being in relationships, staying in relationships despite what injustices people have experienced, racism, violence, and more, is all the more important for us as healers. By introduction, just want to say my name is Dr. Matthew Mock. I am in Berkeley, California, which is the land of the Ohlone, if you will. If I take my students to Angel Island, which is here in the Bay Area, San Francisco, I'm not sure how many of you have been there, but please do come out and appreciate that, because that is where my ancestors came from. I am third generation Chinese American from Guangdong province, if you will. My graduate students who I take there to Angel Island, which is the land of the Miwok, many of them have never been there before, even though it's within beautiful sight of the Bay Area. When they're there, more than probably 90% of the several thousand that I've taken there, the students will say, my gosh, Dr. Mock, I've been trained as a psychologist, I've been trained as a social worker, I've been trained as a therapist, and I know about trauma. But for the first time, not only do I know about trauma in my head intellectually from books, but I know now about it in my heart. Because to see the immigration station that impacted you and others, now I know at a different level than I've never known before. I go by pronouns of he, him, his. I've been fortunate to be a psychologist, if you will, throughout my entire career. I was the director of the Child and Family Youth Program for the city of Berkeley for 20 years, addressing trauma, both urban trauma, as well as also racial trauma, as well as poverty, as well as other losses. I did that for 20 years. I was just reminded where I sit right now. I am in Pleasant Hill, Walnut Creek, California, and I've been teaching and a professor of psychology for 38 years. I've been doing this for so long, Art, that I've been waiting for my watch, which is bestowed usually upon people after a certain time. But now that time has passed, and now I'm waiting for my Fitbit. I don't know what it's going to be, but I'm honored to be here to present on such an important topic. I also wanted to say, by the way, Ark, I acknowledge, I appreciate your initials being AA instead of being AI. I worry a great deal when things become more AI, because I wonder about then the stories, the receiving of stories personally, and the telling of stories, if you will, very privately. Let me start off by saying a couple of things. I'm going to ask you some mindful questions, which, because it's an hour, and by the way, I wanted to say I'm grateful that I have an hour. That feels like a privilege. That feels like a real honor. That's a real blessing. At the same time, it's also a big challenge, isn't it? How do I present materials in such a way that can be covered in just an hour or maybe 50 minutes, so we have a few minutes to interact? So I want to be aware of that and be mindful of that. This idea about the power of stories is that I worry all the more in these times about how stories will endure and how legacies will endure, but there are challenges to those stories. Let me just give you an example of that, very much alive right now and very much in my mind right now. For the dozens of you, maybe over 100 of you, maybe 200 of you that are online, this month, May, that we're in right now, is Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. Or it could be Asian American Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander Heritage Month, or Asian Pacific American Month, right? I would think that most of you have probably been raised in school, been taught that May is Asian Heritage Month. The question I would ask you is, do you know why? Do you know why? Okay. I teach little ones all the way from kindergarten to graduate students, doctorate students, and I might pose this question in a very innocent way to ask them. I was at a high school, Berkeley High School, a couple of months ago, and I asked this very question, and one of the teenagers in the back raised their hand and said, Dr. Mock, I think May is May Asian Heritage Month, because when it got to doling out months to different ethnic racial communities, it was the only month that was left over. Now, of course, that was a teenager response, if you will, to me. And he was not being disrespectful. He was being playful. And we got to talk afterwards. And he said he was very taken by my talk, which I hope you will be by the end of this time. Why is May Asian Pacific Heritage Month? Okay. So I'll tell you, since this is an answer, the answer to that is the following. May is Asian Heritage Month because it was designated that decades ago, because on May 7th, 1843, the first Japanese immigrant, Nakahama Manjiro, arrived in the United States. Now that's important. There were some that also acknowledged that arrived before then from the Philippines, individuals who were acknowledged from Hawaii as well, Chamorro, if you will, and other lands. Here's another reason why May is Heritage Month, not because it was the month left over from other ethnic communities. May is Asian Heritage Month, and this is really important. I'm going to gesture with my hands, is because this is when, when there was the colonization in the East Coast, if you will, and then finally going to West, right? So this is East Coast, and then West to join the East, right? There was what? There was Gamsan, where I am in California. There was Gold Mountain. Gold Mountain was something that people wanted to the gold that was here and all the other possibilities that were here. People wanted to explore that. They wanted to covet that, and they wanted to conquer that, and colonize that in all due respect. So what they built was they built the railroads, and the railroads that they were actually built from the east to the west, if you will, right? They brought in workers. They brought in ancestors from my country, if you will, from China, to work on the railroads. They built the flumes for the lumber, for the water, to take the lumber down to the mines and so on and so forth, and to build the railroad. So Provo, Utah was when the railroads, you can look it up, don't look it up now, but afterwards, in terms of stories, that was where it was finally completed. I'm doing this with my hands because this is really important. When it was completed, there was a photograph taken of individuals, if you will, commemorating the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, which was on May 10th, 1869. A golden spike was driven into the ground, if you will, acknowledging the first transcontinental railroad in the United States. That's very important, right? That little narrative, that little story. But what is it, if you will, I really want you to note? Don't look it up now, but afterwards, if you look up that photograph, of the commemoration of the completion of the railroad in Utah. If you look at all the faces of all the different workers, you will see, first of all, only all men that were there, as though women didn't contribute in some ways. It was all men, if you will. If you take a look at the completion of that railroad, you will see, by the way, 60% of the individuals that worked on the railroads and on the mines, 60% at that time were Asian, were Chinese. If you look at that photograph that was taken, that was commemorating, I took my students to the Oakland Museum to look at that photograph. You will not see one Asian, not one Chinese worker. You will not see one Filipino worker. You will not see one South Asian worker, even though they had worked on the railroads. The point being is that there's this invisibilizing, if you will, and there's an idea about, while there's contributions that are there, that there is stories, if you will, that are sometimes either buried or attempted to not be told. To me, that is an area, if you will, that contributes to trauma. Okay, so this idea about trauma, Ark, I'm going to show a slide here, and do you see this slide? I hope.
I don't see your slide yet. But if you want to go again to that up arrow icon in your bottom scroll,
all right,
audience, you click that and then click the left option, share screen.
Okay, I'm sorry. Click on what icon?
So on the bottom toolbar, you should see your camera icon, your mic icon, and then a little box with an arrow in it. If you want to
Okay.
click on that, that should be
Okay.
your present to audience.
Okay. And then share screen, right?
Yep, share screen, that first option. And then I think the way that we worked it out is if you click the last tab that says share entire screen,
Okay.
that should do it. So click in there, and that should bring it up for you. Okay, we're great. So I see your screen now. Oh, there you go. I can see your slide deck. You should be all good to go, Dr. Ma.
What is the lesson, if you will, colleagues, is this work in multiculturalism, this work on dealing with trauma, this idea in terms of passing on the information of stories. We shall never do it alone, right? We can try to do it alone, but we should not, because sometimes we need to be accountable to our own stereotypes, our own assumptions, what we assume is happening, and we need others to also back us up and keep us accountable. So this slide here, Survivance and Healing from Historical Trauma, the power of storytelling and relational practices. I've given other talks that are titled here, if you will, to acknowledge that. My contact information, by the way, is below the bottom right. If you sell mmock@jfku.edu. I want to thank acknowledging particular people, if you will, in terms of what has preceded and what will follow. I work with the Bay Area Academy here in the Bay Area. I want to acknowledge our ancestors, our elders. A mindfulness, if you will, for you. Who, for you, has inspired you in this work? Why is it that you are involved? Why are you interested in this topic of trauma yourself? I would challenge you, and I challenge most of my graduate students who are also in this work. I am now the leader, if you will, the head of the trauma concentration program here. Legacies, if you will, have a reason for happening, which I'll tell you before we end today, is that I would pose that we do this because it is our soul work. No, I don't mean soul as in S-O-L-E, meaning that it is our only work. That I would pose that more than half of us, maybe the majority of us, are here because it is our soul work, S-O-U-L. And by that, I mean it is doing some of the most difficult, most challenging, but the most gratifying and rewarding work for our legacy of addressing justice. Our soul, S-O-U-L, which is work of the heart, mind, body, and spirit. I want to have opening gratitude here. I was giving this presentation, if you will. I'll never forget this, on March 11th, 2020 in Monterey, where I'm going actually after this meeting. And I gave a great presentation on trauma. And the next day when I was languishing, going back to get questions and comments, there was a flood of people coming in my direction. I mistakenly thought it was actually to try to ask me questions. They were actually very nice to me when they passed me by. But they said, oh, no, actually, Dr. Mock, you gave a great presentation, but we want you to know that there's something called COVID-19, and we're now being asked to go home to quarantine. I shall never forget that. I shall never forget that, and the continuing impact of what it means to be in connection, to have opportunities to remind me that that's not always the case. I'm going to skip through some slides very quickly because of their timing. This is for an all-day presentation plus, so I just want to acknowledge. We want to describe some of the residual affects of reverse experiences and untreated trauma and loss. We want to list characteristics of socially marginalized trauma types, individuals, and families. And we want to identify mainly aspects of sources of wellness, resilience, recovery, and healing after trauma and loss, all the more through storytelling and story listening. How many of you would say you're good storytellers? Majority of time in audiences, very few people will raise their hand if I'm in the room with you. How many of you are good story listeners? Majority of you would probably raise your hand because you're in the healing profession, and so to listen to somebody, be patient, to be sympathetic, to be empathetic, all those things I think people would say. I joke and I say, well, how many of you, by the way, when you were a little one, how many of you used to be a good storyteller before you maybe got exposed to the educational system, where maybe you became more reserved? So this idea of what it is about us and how we get trained, and what are the things about us that are natural that we could actually use to be good trauma healers. I want to acknowledge I have deep, rich understanding of the ways in which our family ancestor stories, including related losses and traumas, are relevant to our current self-awareness through hearing and witnessing narratives presented to us as gifts. I want to tell you my story, if you will. Think about this, and I want to leave this with you at the very end. What is your story? I hope you will get a chance and opportunity when I do breakouts, and will not be able to do that because of the timing today. What is your story related to trauma? When I was a child, I remember my mother who started her sentences in Chinese and finished them in English, or started them in English and finished them in Chinese, a dialect of Samyep, dialect of Cantonese. My mother took me in as her favorite listener, one of 7 children across a 14-year age span. How many of you come from big families? There'll be a support group arc at midnight tonight. I'm kidding. How many of you come from resource-stretched families, also known as poor, but I call them research-stretched? There'll be a support group at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 8 tonight. I reference my own individual story as partly of why I keep myself accountable to clients. My mother used to tell stories when she went back to China when she was a little girl. She said at one time, it was so difficult there that these soldiers came in and they pointed us at 3 of us girls, and they said, I want that girl. And my mother would go away. She wouldn't go away physically, but she would go away, if you will, almost psychologically. And I say this very sensitively in honoring her. And then there was another time my mother was telling me a story as her favorite listener. And she said, at one time they came in and they said, do you know, they kept us underwater. They kept my brother underwater for a very, very long time. I did not understand what my mother was saying when she would go away and she'd tell partially of these stories. But I wondered about that when I went away to school. When I went away to school, I went to Brown University and I was fortunate to study there. I grew up in Los Angeles and I started asking these questions. I come to find out the story that my mother was telling was likely related to when she was in China and there was the rape of Nanking that happened there, where Japanese soldiers came in and pillaged, ravaged, tortured that town, that area. I never fully understood my mother's stories, but I would pose in the work that I do now, I long to hear. I have my legacy of facilitating others telling of stories. What story is yours? I have gratitude for my having had the opportunity to explore my own related familial ancestral histories, gaining a greater awareness of the gaps in my own histories, for which I continue to crave increased knowledge. And then I have respect and appreciation for understanding of working collaboratively. We don't work for, but we work with communities, nourishing relationships with insightful and empathic individuals and families to create ongoing contexts supportive of deepened generational identity work. I say this respectfully. I think I'm probably with an audience who's already aware of this arc, but I feel like that this idea about trauma, there's the ACE, adverse childhood experiences, right? Adverse childhood experiences has become part and parcel of our work. People are being trained about trauma-informed care, being trained in that the adverse childhood experiences. Well, be aware and be continuously accountable that even in the ACE, the construction of that himself, people say it misses, unfortunately, is not enough inclusive of the following. It is not inclusive enough of racial trauma, RACIAL, racial trauma. I think of the work of Janet Helms in Boston College. You can look Dr. Helms up and her work about how do you assess and how do you further dialogue for stories, for narratives, for discussions around racial trauma. The other is, what is the importance, the significance of intergenerational trauma, intergenerational historical trauma? Think about Maria Braveheart, if you will, and her work, the traumas that come from the Holocaust, the traumas that come from Japanese internment, the traumas that come from other historical legacies of the killing fields in Cambodia. and how those are lesser told, not told, and even in these current times, sometimes attempts to maybe erase them or to minimize their importance. So that is the second. The third is all the more you're aware of microaggressions and macroaggressions and micro assaults and macro assaults. That is oftentimes the work of Daryl Sue, of course, at Columbia University, but we must be aware that that original work was from Chester Pierce, an African American psychiatrist, I believe, who worked at Harvard, who wanted to understand why is it that when African American students were at Harvard, how they were being stopped, how they were being questioned, how they were being asked, what are you doing on campus? And they would say, oh, well, I actually am a student here. But being African American, if you will, they were being questioned about that legitimacy. So this idea about microaggressions, micro assaults. If you want to write me for these resources, let me know at mmock@jfku.edu. But also, Dr. Sue has developed a microaggressions, if you will, toolkit, if you will. That's, I think, useful to use. You probably can look that up as well. Where are our stories? Where are our stories, and how might we embody them? And then this idea, I want to appreciate how the personal informs the professional. I've already acknowledged that. Express gratitude for those that have inspired us so that our work is not just our soul work, but it is our soul work. It embodies so much more. And I think I'm going to try, with your help, I might try to show a brief video, I'm being aware of time, that will embody some of the things I mean about the power of stories. And it can, I would pose, all the more effective, not just at an intellectual level or at a verbal level, but at a deeper level. And that brings up this idea about this presentation or what people may draw from it being awesome. The Greater Good Science Center here in Berkeley has talked about the sense of awe, A-W-E, or that comes from awesome, right? That the idea that the more that we tap into what may be awesome, that contributes to our happiness. That actually contributes to our well-being. And they're doing research about that. The things that people are talking about over the past weekend, acknowledging the aurora borealis, excuse my pronunciation of that, but the awe of that, being able to see that in the sky and the miracle of what it means to be alive, to be able to take that in terms of the stars and the skies and the universe, and to be at awe about that. So think about that, how we might tap into that, if you will, when we're working individuals who have experienced trauma. How have they survived? How have they thrived? How have they, despite these things that have tried to take away their spirit, that they have continued to do well, that they have actually embodied those in the legacy of their lives? I hold that for myself because I'm grateful that what my mother taught me as her listener, even though I grew up very acculturated, as you can probably tell, where my mother said, well, no, you don't listen. Okay. Only later did I come to listen. And I'll end on that, a little bit of a story in that regard. What is your story? Who are your, by the way, I put here, who are your heroes or sheroes or theros? People that you lean on, people whose stories have inspired you. And by the way, the stories not only, sometimes are not always positive, but sometimes they may be negative. I will acknowledge when I was growing up, I was impacted by, I was a very sensitive child. And being a little boy, that used to be not okay that I would cry, that I would get upset, that I would visibly cry and I would be teased by my brothers. You know, that's not being male. And I remember being embarrassed by that, being all the more being Asian. Also, I think there was that, maybe that message that we don't show our emotions. I struggled with that, if you will. And I tell you this, I used to tell people that I used to cry with the simplest things. I cried when I saw one of my favorite movies, The Wizard of Oz. Remember The Wizard of Oz? One of my favorite films. I cried when Toto got taken away, if you will, from Dorothy. I cried when the Scarecrow, if you will, with the flying monkeys, if you will, got, if you will, temporarily disconnected and then brought back together. I cried when the Wicked Witch of the West got melted at the very end. Now, I say that as sort of a story, if you will, maybe you can relate to, maybe you can smile with me for a minute. I somehow also connect that. I cried when I was watching, if you will, as I showed my graduate students just the other day, when I watched the civil rights movement, when I saw people being pummeled, people being pushed, people being throttled by police with batons and more as they were crossing a bridge, or actually when they were sitting at benches and trying to sit on stools in a restaurant. And I remember asking my dad, Dad, why are people doing this to people who just want to get something to eat, or just want to go to school, or just want to be at a place that's safe? My father, being Chinese American himself and going through trauma himself through his grandfather and their legacy, was hard pressed to tell me why. And he would say things like, Matthew, Maddie, just do what you need to get by. Be grateful to be here. And so my father's silence, if you will, turned into my longing to hear stories. And I use that, if you will, think about that with clients that I see, clients that I'm grateful to see over the decades that I have. That wisdom, this idea about awe. So this idea about, we know what we have professionally. I've already told you about this, but what is the importance about my true story? And I will end on that, on my true story, that if I listen, as my mother would say, hangwa, if you listen, then you'll understand, if you will, what it is that you're here for. My mother, by the way, just parenthetically, before I tell that, my mother never knew what I did for a living. She would never go to a psychologist. She would never go, perhaps, to someone like you. Maybe in these current times, maybe more so, if we involve ourselves with more community-defined evidence, right? Remember that? We're being taught all the more by evidence-based practices, EBTs, evidence-based treatment. What is evidence that's scientifically based? That is important. But what about of our communities, of our intergenerational trauma, of historical trauma, not just going by what academics say, and I am an academic, but also what people themselves say? What about those that are indigenous to Hawaii in this idea about healing? What is it that they will say? What about individuals who are indigenous to these lands that are theirs? What is it that they would say? And that means not just listening to stories and sources of healing that are not just evidence-based treatment or evidence-based practices, but practice-based evidence, practices that are based in actual life evidence. Or what about community-defined evidence of communities that define healing and how we can bring those back in to be a part of a combined or an integrated, if you will, healing? I was very fortunate, parenthetically, when I was doing my own advocacy work, to work in Merced, by the way, where they have Hmong, H-M-O-N-G, Hmong shaman, working alongside UC Davis trained medical doctors. Hmong shaman, who are spiritual healers, working with university trained doctors. They work hand in hand with doctors. I have Hmong shaman who's saying, by the way, your medical practices, your medicine, they may work, but by the way, if they don't work, send those clients over to me. We will help them with spiritual connection, with spiritual understanding, with spiritual healing. Think about your stories. Think about your ways. Think about clients and asking that question. Why do you think this is happening? And why do you think this is happening now to you, to your child, to your elder, to your family? Depression, shock, anxiety. We need to go where our clients are willing and wanting to tell us, but we need to facilitate an opening of those narratives. So I have some questions here, if you will. How fundamental is culture an aspect of our identities? It is core. It is all of us. Those of you who don't know, I do lots and lots of training, if you will. Be glad to help you with trainings in the future if you so request. Is that we are so familiar with what's called the DSM, right? DSM. I don't want to traumatize you by bringing up that book so early in the morning. It's a book. It's one of the best-selling books probably in the world, right? It's now what? I was trained in the DSM-3, the DSM-4, the DSM-4 TR, and now it's the DSM-5 TR, right? What does the DSM-4 TR stand for? It stands for Diagnostic Statistical Manual, Text Revision 4, right? 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 I would pose, and I do teach it, I train it, I work with it seriously with my students because it is a power document for people to get treatment, for people to get reimbursed for treatment. I would pose that it also stands for Dictionary of the Socially Maligned, DSM, Dictionary of the Socially Maligned, TR, tried repeatedly, and was Roman numeral 4, intravenously fed to new practitioners or new graduate students. It is a document, by the way, and of course the American Psychological Association has apologized for some of what they've done over decades that have perpetuated rather than been more involved in addressing racism, sexism, classism, heterosexism, and more, right? Ideas about what, even in the history of our work, are traumatizing, right? Right? Things like drapetomania, right? Drapetomania is a story that needs to be told. Drapetomania was a term that was derived in the 1800s by Dr. Cartwright. What was drapetomania? It was a medical term that was used to essentially vilify and problematize, pathologize African slaves that ran away from their slave masters. That was what it meant. Running away, drapetomania, essentially running away from home. These are stories that need to be told and how we need to be accountable to them. By the way, here's a little bit. Do we all see, hear, feel, experience the same thing? If you had a pen, maybe just hold your hands in your lap. I'm not seeing you, of course, but just imagining how you may be experiencing this. I want you to answer this question with your fingers, if you will, by putting them in your lap, by just looking at this screen. Those of us who are fortunate to actually look at the screen and read and see, okay? This sentence that's big letters starting with F, family files. Take a look at that sentence just with your eyes, don't point with your fingers. And if I were to ask you, do we all see, hear, feel the same thing when we work with our clients of different cultural, racial backgrounds who have different intergenerational histories? How many F's? How many F's do you see in this sentence? And just indicate that with your fingers in your lap privately. Okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. How many? Okay? All right. We'll come back to that. Okay. This idea about what it means to be in agreement with our work, to have these difficult dialogues around uncomfortable conversations, to be aware of our own selves. All of our survival, says Brian Stevenson in Alabama, all of our survival is tied to the survival of everyone. And that's why we need to, if you will, address these issues all the more in so many different ways, including storytelling. Our stories, I like this very much. Well, I'll read this maybe also towards the end. What I want to do, this idea about the F's. Do we all see, hear, experience the same thing? I would pose very seriously, of course, and you know this from your training, that we don't. That the way we get trained is that we need to acknowledge, if you will, that we see things differently. So when we work with individuals, if you will, to try to see some of the same things, sometimes we have what is called cultural competence, right? When we're trained in working multiculturally, we're trained in cultural competency. And that's the way I was trained. But a mile from my clinic, I was trained also to think about not cultural competence, but cultural humility. How do we hold ourselves accountable to go in with knowledge? We don't go in with no knowledge, But sometimes we go in with knowledge that's biased, that has assumptions, that has stereotypes. We need to ask good questions, which is cultural humility, says Dr. Melanie Tervalon and Jan Murray Garcia. When individuals come are traumatized, we need to be trauma informed. We also need to be more aware of asking good questions and not assuming. We need to be aware of the second dynamic is being aware of power imbalances. Some of the very things that we may be doing in the room, are we replicating the trauma? Because we are in a power position by sitting in the chair that asks questions, that comes up with a diagnosis that's needed, that comes up, if the person says something that's concerns to us, then they might be institutionalized or reported to Child Protective Services. The third is that being aware that we are accountable, we must be accountable to larger systems or institutions that we're a part of individuals. They may associate us with judicial systems, with immigration systems, with systems that may minimize or maybe not take care of their health in ways that they are familiar. How many F's did you see? Do we all experience the same thing? Here it is. Did you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9? By the way, if you saw 9, I hope one of the trainings that you attend during this conference is maybe one on relaxation or self-care. I'm kidding, of course. I'm joking, if you will, lightly. But this idea about how many did you see? And again, I show this because sometimes we assume, and sometimes the message is we don't see the same thing. We don't experience the same thing. Okay? All right. So let me go to another slide, if you will. I'm going to take a risk here, if you will. I'm going to stop share. And I'm going to go, if you will, to, can I share another slide here? Do you see this? A woman launched Science Lantern Festival. Ark, do you see this?
No, we do not see it yet. So if you want to just go through the same process of kind of starting over to that up arrow icon in the bottom bar, the presenter
Okay, wait.
buttons. Okay.
Sorry.
And then the first option of share screen.
Okay, wait. I'm sorry.
Oh, you're great.
You're great. So I'm sorry to go through. So, oh, here it is. Okay, great.
Then share screen.
843. Okay. Okay. Here it is here. I'm sorry, here. Okay, go through. Okay, I see you. Okay, here we go. Great. Never too young to learn. Okay.
No
so
worries.
Go this. I see you on the screen, right?
We don't see anything
Arrow.
yet.
Okay, arrow. Share screen or okay,
Yep.
share screen. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And then that last tab should say entire screen.
Okay.
And that's what we've been using. So if you click that, it should hopefully pull something up for you. Okay, excellent. So we can see your screen now. So if you pull up the new thing you want to share, yep, we can see it.
You see this woman?
Yes. Yes.
All right. I am so appreciative.
Of course.
Okay. So here is something, and I'm being aware of time. And I apologize to be sort of a little bit in different directions, colleagues. Please use self-care when I show you this, okay? In addition to acknowledging my heritage, by the way, my mother, she said, you know, you're a listener, Matthew. Did you know that you are your name, if you will, the day you were born, on the 5th day of the 5th month of the 5th year is the lunar calendar. That is very important for you to be aware of. You were born on the calendar date of a famous listener. March, if you will. March, I acknowledge this, and I think we should also acknowledge it during this month, was a very impactful month, if you will. March 2021. On March 16th, if you will, there were individuals, if you will, in part of Asian hate, Asian adversity, of Asian, if you will, anti-Asian sentiment, that on March 16th, 2021, an individual who said he was, quote unquote, sexually obsessed, if you will, went to the Atlanta spa and sadly, tragically, shot and killed 8 individuals. We need to say their names. We need to tell their stories. The victims, if you will, of that day were Delana Ashley Yuan Gonzalez, 33 years old, Zhao Jie Tan, who was 49 years old, Dao Yu Feng, who was 44 years old, Paul Andre Michaels, 54 years old, Hung Jung Grant, who was 51 years old, Shun Cha Kim, if you will, 69, Sun Chung Park, if you will, who was 74. We need to be aware of those names, and we need to tell those stories and never forget. Let me show you something else that I want to share. And I want to say it a different way through a song, if you will, and the meaning of story, if you will, also through song. Here is somebody introducing this individual. I hope you are able to see it and hear it. If you do not, interrupt me, Ark, and let me know. And please use self-care where you listen to this told story through song.
We can see it, but we can't hear it, unfortunately.
You cannot hear it. Okay.
Yes.
So how do I go back to that? Let's see.
So maybe let's start over. So do stop sharing.
Okay. Okay, stop sharing. Yes.
Perfect. And then now let's repeat the process. So if you've got your screen up, if you can see me.
Okay, I see you.
Perfect. Let's go to that present to audience button.
Yes. Yes.
And then at the very bottom of that, there's a "Are you playing the
yes,
video?"
I thought that I had that on before. My apologies. Okay.
No worries.
Okay.
Click that to yes.
Yes.
Share screen.
Okay.
And then let's go to entire screen, that last
Thank
tab.
you.
Click in there, and we should be good to go. I'll stay on with you just to make sure.
How's that?
We can see it, so that's good. Let's try playing it and see if we can hear it. Oof, gosh, we still can't hear it. So let's try one more thing.
I apologize, colleagues.
Stop sharing. Okay, can you see me again?
Yes.
Okay, then let's go to present to audience again.
Yes. Oh, it went off. Are
So
you playing a video? It's
so
not a
click yes
video,
to that.
but yes. Okay.
Yeah, and then share screen. And then because this is going to be from YouTube, and I believe you're using Chrome, let's actually just go to the Chrome tab. Can you see?
I do.
Okay, so then click on the Chrome tab.
How's that?
Okay, so we can see your email.
I'm entering the site.
So I think before, okay, so let's do it one more time. So stop sharing. We'll get there. It's all good. We'll get there. We've got a little bit of time left. So you can see me.
Yes.
Okay, present to audience.
Yep.
Yes to play in a video.
Okay.
Share screen.
Okay.
And then that first thing you should say, it should say Chrome tab, but you have to click on the specific one that shows your YouTube video. So don't just click on the first one. You got to find the specific line.
Yeah, I did that before when I put the Cam Lantern Festival.
So. Okay, and do you see it on there or you don't see it on there?
Yeah, I do see it on there.
Okay, so click that specifically.
That's what I clicked on now. And then I clicked on it now and I'm putting share.
Okay.
Do you see it?
We see it. Okay, let's hit
but I'm
play.
not sure if it's playing.
Of our community and our
We
history.
can hear it. You're good.
Okay, here it is. Colleagues, please use self-care when you watch this, see it. It is, think about the ways in which we tell our stories through verbal, nonverbal, song, play therapy, and more. I just read the names of the trauma, if you will, of the anti-Asian hate. Let me have someone else tell their story in their words and step away. Here it is.
Her songs were tributes to the struggles of social equity and peace. She has shared the stage with Michelle Obama, Oprah, and youth poet laureate Amanda Gorman. Let's welcome Connie K. Lim, better known as Milk, as she presents her song, Somebody's Beloved.
Please use self-care, if you will. Please use self-care. Take a moment, if you will, as you listen to what I just shared, if you will. This idea about who we are and the ways in which we address issues around trauma I think it needs to start with us and our own care. I want to acknowledge, and when I show that and acknowledge that story and that ways of talking about healing, I want to acknowledge also Thich Nhat Hanh. You know this probably, but please access it. It's called The Resting Poem. At any moment, we can say this small poem to ourselves and take a mini rest. This poem is like a tiny vacation, except that it brings you back to your true home instead of taking you away from it. Breathing in, I know I'm breathing in. Breathing out, I know I'm breathing out. You can even shorten the poem, it works just as well. In, out, in, out. Thich Nhat Hanh. When I was growing up, my name that was given to me was Gin Fan, which, by the way, is very close to rice. And I mean no disrespect to my elders, but I thought, rice, I'm named after rice. Well, first of all, rice isn't very good for you, let alone white rice, and I'm not white. My mother came to tell me later on that, no, you're so acculturated. If you enunciate your name to what it really means, it actually means not rice. It actually means strength and wisdom. We named you after strength and wisdom. And then I'll end on this. My mother also told me this. She said, you were born on the 5th day of the 5th month of the fifth day of the 5th month of the 5th year. You're my special child. Now, I assumed that she said that to all of us, all seven of the children, my 6 siblings, when we were out of the earshot of the others. You are my special child. My mother never knew what I did for a living as a psychologist, as a director of children's services, as a trauma interventionist. When I come to look up who was he referencing when she said, you were born on the same day or similar to someone who's very famous, I looked it up. I come to find out I was born, if you will, on the same date, if you will, not day of the calendar, of course, but decades ago from a famous poet, if you will, called Q Yuan. Q Yuan was probably the first or second most famous poet known in China. Where he lived, if you will, in China in a village, what he would do is that they would have of course, dictums that were handed down by the emperor. When the dictums got handed down that the people had to adhere to, at a point, Q Yuan didn't appreciate what the emperor was saying because the emperor was not saying things that were beneficial to the community. So he stood up for them and protested and said, no, we shall not do this. This is not good for my community. And he actually debated the emperor, which I guess you don't do. And at one point, the emperor shook his head and said, no, we need to silence this man. We need to actually bring him into the fold. We need to control him. And so actually, he sent troops out. This is my version of the story. He sent troops out to arrest and to silence Q Yuan. When those troops were sent, if you will, Q Yuan said to himself, no, they cannot come, because if they come, they will also punish the villagers. By their being here, they will be punished and they will suffer. I cannot do that. So he actually went, he fled, he actually tied a boulder to his chest and threw himself into the river. And he threw himself into the river, of course, he died, if you will, and he sacrificed himself for his villagers. To this day, they tie up, if you will, rice, if you will, into, and actually every year they acknowledge him. My mother said, did you know you were actually born on the same day, the same year as Q Yuan, who was the ultimate listener for his village? So while my mother never knew what I did as a psychologist, she somehow knew and told me my legacy was going to be a healer, a listener. What is your story? What is your stories to be told? What is your legacy of the past? And what is your legacy of the future? On that, I really appreciate you very much. I apologize there wasn't time for interaction and stories and us sharing. I hope there may be an opportunity in the future. And Ark, I apologize. I've been calling you Ark during this whole time, and you've been so critical to do this together. your name that you oftentimes are referred to as not Arc Telos Saint Amor, but
Tay, but it's all
Tay.
affirming, so
Tay.
you're great.
Tay.
Arc
Thank you,
feels
Tay.
good and honoring. We've got a hard stop, so I've got to stop the session here.
Absolutely.
Thank you all so much for coming out, everybody. Please fill out the survey at the end of the session. In 30 minutes, Dr. Tanisha Freeman Foster is up, who is a friend and an amazing person. So please check out her keynote. Thank you all so much. Bye-bye,
You all
y'all.
are awesome. Thanks so very much. Bye, Tay. Bye, all.